Alright guys, so now we have our 4 pieces of wood. We have 2 short pieces and 2 long pieces. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called a dry fit. And so remember earlier we selected which side we wanted to be our top and which side we wanted to be our bottom. And so I selected this more weathered side to be my top because I think it has a little bit more character. And so this side wasn't quite as weathered, so I liked this side better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out which side I want on the top of all of my pieces, and then I'm going to flip them over because we want to make the marks on the back side where we're not going to see them once the project is finished. So I flipped all of my pieces of wood over, and then I'm just going to try and fit them all nicely together. And so this is obviously, whoops, there we go. And so this is just basically to see whether or not my joints are going to fit together and whether I did a good job when I was making my cuts. And so as you can see, my joints fit pretty well together. Okay, so my joints fit pretty well together. They are not 100% perfect. As you can see over here, we've got a little bit of a gap, and that's, you know, you'd like to get rid of it, but it's okay if they're not 100% perfect. If they're really bad and you're going to see a huge hole once you put this whole project together, then you're going to want to go back and figure out where something went wrong. And so I have a feeling that the reason these aren't fitting together perfectly is because my pieces of wood probably aren't totally 100% accurate. And so as you can see on the inside, there's a difference here. So this piece is a little bit longer on the inside and on the outside actually, so there's a pretty significant difference in the size. And so if I want to go back and fix that, I'm more than welcome to do so. I can definitely cut this piece down to size so that they'll be the same length. But for me right now, I think it's going to be okay, and I think it'll come out pretty well once I'm done. And so I'm just going to go back to dry fitting. Sometimes the length of each piece will be the cause of the problem. Sometimes the angles that you cut at weren't 100% correct, and so that would also be another cause of that problem. And so what I'm going to do now that I have everything fit pretty well together is I'm going to mark my joints. And so I'll move this back into the middle here. So I'm going to mark my joints. And what I'm going to do here is, this is for our next step called the biscuit joiner. So what I'm going to do is I am going to line everything up exactly how I want it to fit together once the project is finished. Okay. So just like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a mark right in the middle of the joint. So not too far this way, not too far this way. And I'm just going to make a hash mark right across that joint like that. Okay? And you might have to mark pretty hard because, like I said, this wood is pretty dark and so it's hard to see. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to label each side of the joint. So I'm going to label this A. I'm going to label this side A. And I'm going to do that with all of my joints. I'm going to be very careful not to move this too much. So I'm going to mark right here in the middle. I'm going to call this joint B. Joint B. Alright, so now I can see all of my joints are labeled and they each have a hash mark right in the middle. And this is going to prepare us for our next step where we're going to be using the biscuit joiner. Alright guys, I'm going to show you this next part with some wood that you're going to be able to see a little bit better on. So this is not the wood we're going to use for our project. This will just be an example. And so as you can see here, what I've already done is I have already labeled this joint in the way that you labeled your other joints. And so I put a hash mark in the middle and then I labeled each side of the joint with the correct letter. So in this case, I've made a joint A. And so what I'm going to do now is I can separate that because it's labeled. And I'm going to show you guys how to use the biscuit joiner. And so this is the biscuit joiner. And so what this biscuit joiner is going to do is it's going to put a little notch into the wood. And so I'll show you how it's going to do that. Now this is unplugged right now, so it's not going to hurt me, but I'm just going to show you the parts here. And so the biscuit joiner, you can see under here, inside of here is a blade. And so I'm going to push it forward and you can see the blade comes out. And so you can see that blade right there. And so the blade comes in and out, and the biscuit or the joint is only going to be as deep as that blade comes out. And so there's different depths and there's different sizes. In this case, we're going to be using a size 0. And so that's basically the joiner. And this is here as a guard. It's here to protect us. And as long as you don't do anything silly like use the tool improperly, your hands should be safe. because the only place the blade is going to be is underneath this guard. And so it's a little bit difficult to see, but there's actually a little notch right here. And you can see it right in the middle there. There's also a notch on that metal. It's a little bit easier to see right here. It lines right up with that. You'll be able to see it once you get a hold of the tool. And so what I'm going to do with that notch is I'm going to line it up with that hash mark that I made on my wood. And so I'm going to take my wood with my hash mark and my letter. I'm going to line the hash mark right up with the little notch on the jointer. And so now I'm going to plug in the saw and I'm going to show you guys how this is done. And so now I've got the jointer in. I just called it a saw. I apologize for that. It's actually a jointer. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the trigger on the jointer, and the trigger is right here. And when I pull that trigger, the saw is keep calling it a saw. It is a jointer. When I pull that trigger, the motor is going to kick on and the blade is going to start to spin. Now once that blade starts to spin, I'm going to wait until I hear it get to full power, and then I'm going to slide this forward so that that blade comes out and goes into the wood. Okay? So it's very simple. You just want to hold onto your wood, make sure it stays in the correct spot, and make sure you don't stick your fingers anywhere over here near the blade. Alright, so everything is lined up, ready to go. You guys can see my notch is in the correct spot. And so now I'm going to turn it on, let it get to full power, and then I'm going to push forward, let it go back, let go of the trigger. Okay. Alright, so very, very simple. And now you can see that I actually have a notch right in there in the wood. And so I'll show you guys how this whole thing works. So, got biscuits. These are, it says plate joining biscuits, okay, and these are size 0, as you can see here. So I'm just going to go ahead and get one of those out, and you're going to see that it'll fit right in there like that. When it goes sideways, that's how it's going to look, okay? And so I'm going to notch the other side so that I can show you guys how this will fit together. So now I've got a perfect notch on that side. What I'm going to do is I've got my biscuit, there's my joint, and when I stick them together, that biscuit will disappear, but the joint will be a lot stronger because now there's going to be material holding the two sides together. So set the biscuit joiner aside, unplug it so we don't end up hurting anybody. And so now what's going to happen is I'm going to do another dry fit. So I'm going to take 4 of these biscuits, one more, I'm going to put 2 into this piece right here. Oops. That biscuit's a little bit funny shaped. That's okay, it'll go in. Okay. So I've got 2 in there. This is my B joint. So this is probably going to be over here. This is my A and my A. Squeeze those together. Oops, that biscuit is really a little bit too big, I think. We'll trade it out. There we go. So my A and my A, my B, and my B. And then I'll stick 2 into the C and D joints. Okay, and so now, if I have done everything properly, when I do a dry fit, all of my biscuits should disappear into my joints, and everything should look just about perfect. Guys, so now that we have our whole frame dry fitted and we have our biscuits in our joints, what we're going to do now is we're going to get ready to glue this whole project together. And so this is going to be the final step of our first phase of this project. And so what we're going to do before we start doing any kind of gluing though, is we're going to put down some paper towels. Now I don't have any paper towels out here, so what I'm going to put down to protect my table is some paper bag. And so I've got my paper bag here. This is going to protect my table so that if any glue gets out, then it won't get on the table and it won't damage it. But you do need paper towels to wipe up any excess glue that you might accidentally get on your joint. So it's a really good idea to have those around. So what I usually do before I start sticking anything together is I'm going to get a very, very light coat of glue to cover the entire surface of the joint. And then once I have everything covered, then I'm going to start sticking it together. I've already glued together a couple of my joints and I've already put some glue into the other joints. But I just wanted to show you guys what I mean when I'm talking about how much glue you're going to need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a very, very, oops, need to open the glue. A very, very, very thin layer of glue onto my joint. And so I want to get good coverage. I want to get as complete a coverage as I can, but I don't want a bunch of extra glue on there, okay? And so I'm going to actually just scrape off a little bit of that because I think there might be too much. So I'll just kind of layer that into the biscuit joint here. And so there should be, you know, it should be covered, but it should not be dripping by any means. And then I'm going to definitely want to make sure that I get all of my biscuits into the joints before I put them together. And so I'm going to put a little bit of glue on the top side here, just a little tiny bit though. I don't want it dripping out. Maybe on the edge here, also on the bottom. Okay. So I'm going to stick that glued part into the joint right here. And you have to remember that you cut all of these pieces of wood so that they would go to a particular joint. So they're going to be joined with only the corresponding piece of wood. So I'm going to do this side as well. Like I said, you want it covered, but you do not want it to be squeezing and dripping out, because we're not going to be sanding this project, and so if we have a bunch of extra glue, it's going to drip out, and then it's just going to be there, and it's going to look weird. It's going to be shiny, and we don't want that. So I'm going to actually wipe up a little bit of this, because there's a little bit too much on there. Okay. Sometimes you might even just want to take your paper towel, smooth it out a little bit. There you go. So that's probably a good amount right there. And so since this joint is going to go over here and I don't have a biscuit in that piece yet, I'm going to do another biscuit. And remember, you're not going to want to glue biscuits into each side, because then you're going to have 2 biscuits per joint, and that is just not going to work. So I've got 2 biscuits in this piece, but no biscuits in this piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it, I'm going to stick it together. Right? Like so. And you can see there's a little bit of glue seeping out of my joint there. Now a little bit is going to be okay. This much will be fine. It's not going to be a big deal. But if you have a bunch, it's not going to be very pretty. So I'm actually going to just kind of try and clean this up a little bit. It'll be fine though. Okay. And then so now I'm going to apply some more glue to this side. And you guys want to do this pretty quickly so that you don't end up with everything drying on you, because that's bad. You guys are going to notice that I have my top side up now. And the reason for that is that I only want to see what the joints are going to look like from the top. And so if there's going to be extra glue squeezing out on the back side, we care about that, but we don't care as much, because we're not going to see those once the whole project is put together. So it's important, but it's not as important. So basically I've got everything squeezed together here. It's all squeezed in. And you can see there's not going to be any excess glue coming out of my joints, but my joints are pretty well secured, okay? And they all look square, and I don't have any major gaps anywhere, and it looks pretty good.